Welcome to the Sakya Monastery here in Seattle, Washington. My name is Ellen Braun, and I'm a dedicated member of the monastery, as well as a part of the Marici Fellowship here. I'm the grateful parent of a college student, a longtime technology professional, and a coach and advocate of compassionate leadership. I'm honored to be spending time with the head lama of the monastery, His Eminence Avikrita Vajra Rinpoche, to discuss his new book, Wake Up to What Matters. Avikrita Rinpoche is 26 years old and was born here in Seattle to the first Tibetan family that settled in the U.S. following the Tibetan diaspora. This family, his family, is from the ancient lineage that heads the Sakya order of Tibetan Buddhism. So, at the age of 4, he left us and moved to northern India to undergo traditional training required to be a spiritual teacher and leader of the lineage, as well as to receive a contemporary education. Since graduating from Dongzar Institute in India, he has taught classes in both Tibetan and English across the globe, as well as here in the home monastery in Seattle. In addition to being the head lama of the Sakya Monastery and the Sakya Heritage Society in India, he has founded the Vajrachara Foundation, which facilitates spiritual programs in Nepal, and the Marici Fellowship, which is a Seattle-based social outreach network with branches across the world. And again, to add to those accomplishments and contributions, he is an author of the very timely book, Wake Up to What Matters, A Guide to Tibetan Buddhism for the Next Generation. Thank you, Rinpoche. You are so busy attending classes, teaching classes, traveling extensively. Why did you feel that now was the time to write this book?
Right, so I think it was straight away when I first ever gave a talk here in English in Seattle. And a friend of mine was saying that, oh, you should write a book, come on, this is cool. And I have to admit, when he said that, I straight away said, number one, there is no need, as I have nothing special to say. Number two, there are a lot of more important books written by my great ancestors who were great masters that need to be translated into English. So those are more important. And I mean, it was encouraging. It was encouraging that my friends were saying that, but then, yeah, I really believe that it wasn't really necessary at all. And plus, how do I even get the time? I mean, that's enough of a reason to say, sorry, pass. But then, well, life has its way of throwing all my logic out of the window. I think it was one of I was giving one of these talks in English here in Seattle, and as you can see, we have a very traditional shrine hall in the monastery, and behind is the office of my late grandfather, where he would receive visitors. And I mentioned this in the book. My grandfather was my main spiritual teacher, and actually my hero. So it was quite nerve-wracking for me whenever I was giving these talks over here in English, that he would often be at the back in the office, sipping a cup of coffee and listening to what I'm saying. And I had to make sure that I was doing my best when I say anything, about Buddhism, because of course, whatever I was saying was what he taught me. So one time when I was giving these talks, he was asking one of our staff that, are we recording this? And they said yes. And he said, good, make sure to write it down. Okay, at that point, he didn't tell me to make a book at that point, but that did got my friends saying, come on, there must be a reason why your grandfather said that. You should write a book. And I said, nah, not now. The next year, whenever that was, a little more of an icebreaker was that a young Tibetan here living in Seattle, I guess more interested in other stuff, but not so much visiting the monastery, but he mentioned to me that he wanted to visit when one of these talks was happening, because me using modern examples that he could actually relate to. And so I have to admit, I actually thought that, I think that if the way how I explain Buddhism actually resonates with my young American friends here, but also millennials of my own culture, then maybe a book could help at some point, but not now, eventually or something. But then my friends had to go running to my grandfather and start telling about this. And so then, right away my grandfather was saying, make the book, make it now. So then, like I said, hero. I couldn't say no to that. We just had to make time, and the rest is history.
Wonderful. You do write in a manner that is very understandable.
Okay.
So I very much appreciated it.
Thank you.
I really appreciated what you wrote about ignorance and misknowing. Would you share a bit more about the distinctions and the importance there?
Yeah, this is an important theme in Buddhism because, well, for me, I started learning. I learned Buddhist ideas in Tibetan, not in English. So, because I was born here in Seattle, and even though I moved to India to train as a Lama, as a spiritual teacher, so because I was born here, I could only speak English. But when I moved there from a very young age, most of my exposure after that was watching Power Rangers. But then, later on, I upgraded to Marvel movies, which I still watch. I wasn't learning any highbrow philosophical terms, not at all. I mean, unless you count with great power comes great responsibility from Spider-Man or something, but no, other than that, no. But when I was in my teenage years, then I started learning English and other languages. And so then, when I first saw Buddhist texts in English, I would drive my, tutor and English-speaking friends crazy because I would have a lot of questions. But then, when I heard this word or see this word, ignorance, right away I would go like, wait, but what does that mean? Because we're not suffering because we are stupid to reality or, ignoring it. So, we might even have a wise understanding. We learn wise understanding of reality, but the problem is deep down, where conceptual thinking doesn't have so much power, we tend to misknow the way things are. And which is why we need meditation and mind training to get to the root of that misknowing, so that we can be free from fear, pain, stress, and so on. And yeah, the Tibetan word marikpa, it literally means is misknowing for that reason. I mean, I don't want to be too pedantic over here, but so I would like to reflect on these distinctions as I've done a few times in the book.
Yeah, wonderfully. There will be a lot of readers that share your passion about addressing bullying. I'm one of them. Why do you have such a passion about it? And what advice would you give to all of us on how to navigate through the complicated and divisive times that we're in?
Yeah, so I think I touched upon this in a very short anecdote in the book. Not so much about full-on bullying, but just an example of becoming conscious about my own male privilege when I was young, and how mortified, how terrible, how awful I felt inside to exclude a female cousin of mine in a game in a kind of rude way. So that memory became a trigger for me. Any time when I hear something even close to bullying. So what came up for me was that, this feels awful. How do I even do that? I feel awful, and I'm making somebody else feel awful. So, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work that out. This feels awful. So why do we do it? So as I processed that, I found that relating to any individuals or community that dehumanizes them, that makes them, others, makes them, reduces my own humanity, my own, extinctual empathy, a sense of goodness in treating others the way how I want to be treated. So how then I made a thing about that was that, generally speaking, in Tibetan Buddhist communities that I was raised in, compassion is a core value. And perhaps that our community, the hardships that our community have gone through as a diaspora, that we try hard as much as we can to maintain those core values. So I didn't witness any bullying going on when I was young, but when I first came to visit in America and in Europe, and I talked to a few young friends and to their parents and so on, and heard really, heartbreaking stories about, bullying and so on. So, and although I know that love and compassion are not alien values here at all, but just by comparing it, how things felt to me in the Tibetan Buddhist community in Asia, something in the breakdown of a strong sense of community, a strong, something lacking in the resources, perhaps that, with the, perhaps like, dealing with an anger and fear that could actually lead to unchecked aggression in the young people here in the community here. That what struck me. So I felt the need to tackle this in two ways. One has been by teaching the resources that we have in Tibetan Buddhism to, navigate our way through, difficult emotional terrain. I kind of mentioned this in the book, some ideas on how I found it helpful, that to be with instead of being stuck in those, difficult emotional experiences through mind training, through meditation techniques, and so that we can unlock all the, empathetic responsiveness and all the beautiful ways of being, the way, what we talk about in Buddhism. But the second part of my work recently that has been that not everyone will want to, go through the filter of these, being Buddhist teachings and methods. Some might, have their own religious practices that they want. That could mean, with the greatest respect, want to work on their own paradigms, or people who get put off by the ideas of anything religious at all. So, with through the hard work of my friends here in Seattle that have been doing with me, I felt that we have this Marichi Fellowship based in Seattle, but a broader community outreach. We've been exploring all and any means to promote a culture of compassion, so that we can be able to help people with dealing with these issues such as bullying and so on. And so I'm very hopeful that with both the traditional teachings and the values that promote empathy and connectivity, plus the secular programs that might, that help deal with these issues on bullying, can really make a difference. I have to say, though, our world is changing. So, more recently, I've heard cases that, not many, but some, which I would call bullying going on in some of the communities in Asia. So, for prevention rather than cure, I would almost bring this up every time when I give talks in the schools. And visiting schools is something that I'm asked to do quite a lot. And so what I've heard cases was about that, with good intentions, but failing to realize that some young students, people are feeling disconnected, feeling lonely in schools. And some of the teachers are scolding and pointing out faults, like I said, with good intentions, thinking that it would encourage them to be better themselves and all that. Yeah, it doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. Not happening on my watch. So recently I was giving one of these talks and these lectures in the school, and I noticed that the students are listening very attentively. And the teachers are also, they're listening and they're nodding in agreement, like, yes, that's true, that's right. So I had to pause a couple of times there and said, I'm not actually talking to the students over here, I'm actually talking to you guys. And, the students will laugh and cheer. So I just hope that it's working. Yeah. It's good?
You wrote really well a little bit about doubt. And doubt seems to be kind of a paradoxical part of practice. Can you share a little bit more about that?
That's actually a very good question. I think I kind of mentioned this in the book when I talk about the difference between being, skeptical and cynical. So what's that about is that on the one hand, we are encouraged in Buddhism to rigorously analyze our minds. The teachings that we receive and what the Buddha himself was saying to develop our wisdom instead of just believing and having blind faith in our religious tradition. Now, I mentioned this in the book that it's like being a scientist in a laboratory when it comes to being a 21st century Buddhist. However, here we're talking about the laboratory of life. We're doing this not to become some kind of smarty pants or something, but to develop the skills and to develop the knowledge to be free, to live a life without fear, to live a life without stress and the pain and everything. So, and of course, to be an optimum benefit to our community, to our world. On the other hand, the head has to meet the heart. So we have, which is why we still talk about faith in Buddhism. And because as a contemplative tradition, we have this joyful experience to develop confidence in the teachings. That enables us to do that. The Buddha as the teacher, as well as the teacher in the Sangha, who we have learned from, who help us learn. And then the ability to put those teachings into practice and reach our goals. So while we put so much emphasis on, learning and making the most of our amazing human brains we have, not just having blind faith, which Buddhism is not about, but to also have emphasis on the heart qualities like faith, trust, and so on. So, coming back to your question, doubt. So doubt arises in a kind of a vortex between the head and the heart. It's where our brains have not fully informed our hearts. Or, difficult emotional, dissonance that overwhelms us, and our knowledge seems to be made temporarily redundant. Questioning a spiritual teaching, it's not just fine, but it's actually what we need. How do we know the answers if we don't ask? But, doubting ourselves, the integrity of the teachings as an emotional reaction rather than informed inquiry, then that's usually very disempowering. and turgid. So knowing the context and really taking it to heart as to why we are working with Buddhist ideas and practices, and through meditation and mind training is, I think, the way to make sure that we know the know the difference in the values of what I was talking about in the second chapter, learning for liberation versus doubt and cynicism.
It's a great lead-in. In chapter 2, you write, "With these riches of personal and social conscience, the power to change our lives as well as the world we live in is right here in the palm of our hand." Can you describe what you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think I can sum up that very succinctly on what I was reflecting there. And I feel that it's such a key theme for Buddhism being relevant in our generation, and of course future generations, which is to maintain a sense of honor, a sense of integrity, because of trust in our basic goodness. So as individuals on our own path, spiritual or otherwise, we're not going to have many friends. We're not going to be, we're not going to feel better of ourselves if we bypass our integrity and our, personal conscience. So that sense of integrity is very important. Otherwise, of course, we just, we stand out to be hypocrites if we don't even try to live up to our values, our core values. But then there's a danger there. There's a danger that, danger of kidding ourselves as, private citizens with private spiritual and moral lifestyle. We get to be apathetic about these problems going on out there in the world. Now, if that's the case, then, I remember when I was young, and whenever I hear about climate change or, bullying and so on going on, I would just go right away to say, but it's not right. We've got to do something. But then what I get back is, you're still young, and when you grow up, you realize that there's nothing we can do. And you just have to accept it, that it's just the way it is. Well, I'm 26 right now, and I have not changed how I feel about that one single bit. I'm still on fire. And I'm absolutely not okay sitting around and doing nothing about that. You know what I think? I think that with global communications these days, is that, like through the internet and so on, that there's more awareness. There's more awareness of global problems. That more awareness of that global problems are not something that's out there, but they're in our world. And we're the ones that have the power to change that. It's up to each and every single one of us to make a difference. So, and this is, when I mentioned in the book, when I speak about 21st century Buddhism for the next generation, that's on the cover actually, I'm not just talking about people who are born after 1984 or something. I'm talking about everyone, anyone who feels that a personal integrity has to go hand in hand with social responsibility. That we're all in this together, that we're all interdependent. And that apathy can never foster empathy. And without empathy, sorry, we don't get to talk, we don't even get to talk about Buddhism. So I hope that I at least touched upon these ideas in the book. And yeah, there's a lot more I could say about that, so I'm just going to stop right there. Or maybe you should just plan for book 2.
We'd like a book 2,
yeah.
So that would work. No, I appreciate you weaving into the some of the broader big issues that we're dealing with, climate crisis and poverty, etc. So you mentioned the 21st century or the next generation.
Yeah.
How do you see Tibetan Buddhism going for the next generation?
I mean, I guess that's up to all of us.
Yeah.
I guess, I don't know. I mean, whether we're talking about the cultural presentation, the format, and a standard of study and practice, what Tibetan Buddhism can offer, can contribute to society as a whole. I don't know, honestly. But what I feel is that Tibetan Buddhism has amazing resources for understanding and training the mind, to promoting a culture of wisdom and compassion, which is something that our world needs more than ever. And how it's such a relevant force to many people, and I think then that future generations can utilize these resources, and from then I feel that it can really make a huge positive impact.
Really helpful insights. And as we close our time together, I'm curious if there are any other words that you'd like to leave with us particularly?
Well, I hope that the best way to leave you all is that if you find anything in the book that helps you find more happiness, more of your own, to understand your own wisdom, or help you get more calm, clarity, to be more empathetic, to be an empathetic member of our global family, then wonderful. That's great. And whatever your interests, your backgrounds, whoever you are, where you're from, you don't need to be Buddhist at all. I just hope that we can use these ideas to be able to be better humans, and to be able to bring more love and understanding to our world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Those are very helpful insights. I know that what I found personally very helpful was, as I mentioned, you write in a manner that is very easy to understand. So it gave me some practical ideas on how to address some of the things that we discussed in the questions, as well as that you covered in the book at large. So much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you for spending some time to tell us about your book, Rinpoche. And if anyone is interested in knowing more about Rinpoche's work or book, please visit avikrita.org, avikrita.org. Thank you.